Welcome to this special November 23rd meeting of the Budget, Capital, and Personnel Committee. All committee members are here, and we also have Ann Corman. I'm hoping we'll get some of our other legislative colleagues to join us. The purpose of this meeting is twofold. We have some redlining, a couple of redlining resolutions that have already been passed by HHS for staff for Frank Krupa's department, mental health department. And then we're going to continue our discussion of the salaries that we need to set for our county sheriff and our county clerk. We discussed this a bit at our last meeting in executive session. This will be an open session, so I want to caution everyone that when we discuss positions, we are not discussing names. Most of the salary information that we're going to be discussing that relates to positions is a matter of public record. But just to stay on the safe side, we're just not gonna, we're gonna talk about positions, not names. So anyhow, I guess we will move right into the resolutions that we have for the mental health staff. We've got resolution authorizing the salary for position above the salary range nurse practitioner in psychiatry, ID number 10513. Can I get that moved, please? Rich moves, Glenn seconds. Frank, would you like to speak to this resolution, please?
Sure. So we have two nurse practitioner positions at the mental health department. One is currently filled, one is vacant, and we've been recruiting for some time. The currently filled position, the person has an offer outside of the department, and what we believe our current salary is not close to market rate. And so that's what this proposal is to do, is to present an offer that we believe is closer to market rate to try to secure our existing nurse practitioner, as well as increase the salary for the vacant one, so we can recruit with that salary in hopes of attracting a second nurse practitioner.
Okay, I understand that. Does anybody have any questions for Frank? Glenn.
Frank, you said it comes to closer to market value. Does it meet market value, or are we just spinning our wheels and we'll need to raise this sooner?
Well, we think it meets the offer that the existing position has, but honestly, market rate is difficult because it's proprietary information. So it's not like we could call the hospital or another, local agency to find out. We do have people that are, looking and, are out there. So we do think it's close. But the healthcare market is so volatile right now that I wouldn't want to say that I might not have to come back to you, but I think this is a fair offer that we're trying to put together, and we'll know through the recruitment, right? Because we are asking to increase a vacant position to the same rate. So if we get some candidates, we'll know we're closer to where we should be. If we don't, then, we might be having further conversation.
Okay, thanks, Frank. Glenn, you're muted still. Unmute yourself, Glenn.
Are we going to upset a lot of people by raising the salary, not raising other people? Should we wait for a study, or is it imperative that we do this right now?
I can speak from my perspective. This is right now, there's only a single person in this title in the county, and we're talking about a secondary position. If we lose this person, we would be down to 2 part-time psychiatrists doing all of our Medicaid prescribing, and they just would not be able to meet that. So in the absence of this, we would likely be contracting 4 hours that we would only get through telemedicine, and probably be paying double what we're proposing to make this hourly rate. So it is a bit time imperative.
Okay, is that it, Glenn?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Martha.
Yeah, I kind of had similar questions as Glenn. So let me just understand. So these are both called nurse practitioner in psychiatry, is that right? But they're two different grades?
Correct. They're the same job title, but two different positions.
Okay, so they'd both go up to 68, 78, you're saying, and you're looking for two people in this position?
Well, we have one currently filled, which would be a salary increase. And then the second position what we would be recruiting for.
Okay, and so it's not that one is supervising the others, that they're equal, but got it, okay. I am, to follow up sort of on Glenn's line, do you think CSEA will agree with this? I mean, this seems like and especially the next one as well, a pretty slippery slope to start or doing even more salary increasing on a case-by-case basis. What's CSEA going to say?
I can speak to that briefly. I've had an informal conversation to give a heads up to CSEA on this. It would entail an MOA with them for each case and stating that this is non-precedent setting. So in that sense, it would be non-precedent setting. However, it does open the door to other instances in other departments where we're facing similar issues, which is why we're at the same time trying to put forward this compensation study as soon as we can to address this issue before it proliferates to the point of that it's unmanageable.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about that. Are there any, have you had, you said you have had some preliminary discussions with CSEA?
I just to inform them that this was going to be discussed publicly with the legislature to make them aware of it and to make them aware that if it's discussed and approved, then we would be bringing forth an MOA.
And if they don't agree, what are the, is this kind of, we tell them we're doing this, or is this that they have some kind of veto over it or can attach conditions?
Well, I guess it didn't occur to me that they could. I mean, it would be to the benefit of the members in these titles. So I would bring that back to you all for your consideration if they had objections. None were pointed out at the time that I brought this to their attention.
Okay, thank you. Frank, are there any reimbursements or revenues associated with either of these positions?
So yes, they do generate revenue, but the currently filled position is already generating that revenue. So these are additional costs that we're incurring without hope of additional reimbursement for it, right? It's the cost of securing those reimbursements has gone up, essentially.
Our profit margin has gone down.
I'm a little confused. You're saying that is the incumbent kind of actually raising their own salary or revenues to match the salary, and we could get additional revenues with the second position?
Yeah, so for the second position, it's currently vacant, so it's not generating any revenue. Once we recruited somebody into it, they would generate revenue, but we already have an established revenue input from the existing position that's filled. Increasing this isn't going to generate any additional revenue. It's keeping us from losing the ability to provide those services. So it is, as Deborah described it, it is a cut into our, our break-even.
So-called profit
position.
Margin. Okay, but
we don't profit.
Right, but for the taxpayer looking at the ticket at the bottom of this resolution, which is a big one, it's not entirely local tax dollars that pay for this service.
Oh, no. I would say the vast majority of it is covered by revenue generated by the positions. But I just want to be clear that raising the salary isn't like you're going to get X amount additional revenue because of that. Because you can only do so much work in an 8-hour day that's billable. And the person is already doing that level of work. The cost is just going up to receive that revenue.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much, Frank.
Okay, thanks, Martha. Mike?
Just wondered, why is this an hourly rate instead of a salary figure for these positions? I mean, do they work odd times or?
Well, the way I'll have to defer to Lisa, but the way I understand it, all of our salaries are established at an hourly rate. And then the amount that we get annually is dependent on the number of hours worked. I don't know if that answers the question, or if Lisa, you have some clarity.
And when
Yeah.
you say we, you mean the health department and the mental health department?
It means for white collar titles, and all of the salary scales and schedules are posted and agreed upon per contract. So, and because departments have different hourly hours worked per week, 35, 37 and a half, 40 hours a week, they're calculated either via the hourly rate or the annual salary, depending on hours worked per week.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, good question, Mike. Any other questions for Frank or Lisa on this? We ready to vote? Okay, Martha,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Rich,
Yes.
Glenn,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. So that passes unanimously. And the second motion in the resolution in the same vein, authorizing the salary for position above the salary range, public health engineer, ID 10531. Would somebody please move that? Rich moves, Glenn seconds. Frank, you're on again.
Great, thank you. Similar situation. So at the health department in our environmental health division, we have a public health engineering position. This is one we've actually been looking at the salary for quite some time. We had conversations pre-COVID about this salary not being close to market rate when we were recruiting in. In fact, the incumbent was not fully licensed when they came on board, and we were able to work through our environmental health director, who is a licensed engineer, to cover until the incumbent could get licensed. The incumbent now has an outside offer, and we are at the point now where it's no longer theoretical. It's a problem that's in front of us. The reality being is that the current salary, we likely would not be able to fill the position if it became vacant, and we would be contracting out for those hours because it's an engineering work for our on-site sewage systems that has to be done, and we would likely be paying double the hourly rate that we currently are in order to achieve those services through contracting, likely with the same person only working for an outside entity. So it's a similar situation as the last.
Any questions for Frank on this? Glenn, and then Martha.
Unmute.
And yeah, and you too, Mike. Sorry. Glenn,
I know. I should take it off. Frank, a public health engineer, is that what they do? Is just look for sewer problems? But what's the job description?
Sure. So there's a lot of components to it, but the biggest one is all of our on-site sewage systems have to be designed by an engineer. And so our sanitarians do the work, but our engineer has to review it and sign off on it. And then there's also other engineering reviews that are done in the department, but a large component of it is related to the on-site systems.
Is that state law, Frank?
I'm sorry, say again, Deborah?
Is that a state law requirement, the engineering?
Yeah. So in order to issue those permits, they have to be signed off by an engineer.
Okay, thanks. Anything else, Glenn?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, Martha and then Mike.
So similar question about revenue. Does this person bring in fees?
They do, but we less percentage than the previous positions we discussed.
Okay. Is it the case that if the person had been licensed when they came in, would they have been hired at a higher rate?
No, it's just the candidates that we're able to attract at our existing salary are very limited. And so we were fortunate to find the incumbent who had some experience but was not fully licensed. And we were also fortunate that our public health director happens to also be an engineer. That is not a requirement of that position. So we were able to manage in the interim while that process unfolded. But becoming licensed doesn't have an impact on the salary, which is part of the challenge.
So that's an interesting point for the compensation study, I guess, more broadly, that if somebody comes in with a certain level of education and then attains an additional degree or license that's related to their job, is there any benefit to that in terms of their salary? So I'll just park that thought for y'all to think about next year. Has there been a conversation? I assume there's been a conversation with CSEA on this one as well?
Yes, same.
Okay. All right. In for a penny.
Martha, just real quick. I'm sorry, Brenda's pinging me in the background as she's listening. We do also get state aid on a portion of this position as well. So it's revenue, state aid, and county contribution all covers this position.
Okay, thanks. Note to any public listening is that that's true of a lot of our public health and mental health and DSS positions as well. Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Frank.
Okay, thanks. Mike?
My question is more general in nature, maybe after we get done with this resolution.
All right, is there anything more on this particular resolution? Let's vote then. Martha?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes?
Rich?
Yes.
Glenn?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. I think we need to bear in mind, I appreciate the concerns that everyone's having about doing these ad hoc adjustments to our salaries and the impact it has on the rest of our bargaining unit and our it's with the unions. But this compensation study is long overdue, I think. And as with many other existing problems, it's been exacerbated by the impact of the pandemic. So we need to play catch up as fast as we can. It's my understanding that the sheriff's office is voting on its contract tomorrow. And I know that we've heard some information about the white collar unit. I mean, we've got negotiations going on, and I think it's worth bearing in mind that this is kind of a similar situation to what happened in Europe after the series of Black Plagues, when the entire economic structure got turned upside down. I mean, I know this is geeky medieval history stuff, but that the impact of that on the economic foundations of feudalism and the economic structure in Europe was enormously impacted by the loss of population and the fact that the balance of power shifted to employees rather than the people that used the benefits of their labor. And it had a lot to do with the rise of a so-called middle class, the bourgeoisie in Europe. So this is just a historical thing we're going to have to live through, I'm afraid.
Deborah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think there's fascinating stuff that happened there. I mean, some historians say that that was critically important for us to have the Enlightenment, was that you had to kill half of Europe. But
does that mean if we kill half of the United States, we'll get smarter? No, I'm sorry.
Well,
I didn't say that.
but it totally upset the existing structures, particularly the church, which owned all the land and pretty much called all the shots. And suddenly their competence was called into question because they couldn't do anything about the plague. Yeah.
I just want to speak to the members of the public here and say that, see, you never know what you're going to learn when you listen to a committee meeting. So thank you for the history lesson, Deborah. No, it's really interesting. I'm sure you're right. I think we are looking at a pretty significant
paradigm shift.
change. Yeah.
Well, but the plague in Europe also was, 5 or more years. And, I think we're continually hoping it's just going to be over. And over isn't probably going to be here for a long time.
Well, and another major difference is that we have vastly better and faster means of mass communication at all. So changes probably happen a lot more quickly. It might not take 5 years. But anyway, everybody needs to kind of bear in mind that we're dealing with a very unusual situation in the wider world, and we are just doing the best we can to keep up with that. Mike, did you have a general comment you want to continue history discussion?
History, I can well remember when we had just 2 red line positions. They were the psychiatrists, which could not be had without going above the calculated salary for those positions. I just wonder, where are we now? How many red line positions do we have at this point? Because I think this may feed into the compensation study as to how out of line we are. And I wonder if either Lisa or Ruby happens to have to know that.
Or even just a ballpark number.
I don't per se. I think Kathy is raising her hand. She may have a better idea.
I think there's probably a handful.
A big hand or a little hand?
I would say no more than maybe 6.
Okay.
Is my guess.
And are they mostly public health, mental health?
No.
Okay.
No, it varies.
Well, that's a good question, Mike. That's certainly something, that's a piece of information that will have a bearing on our compensation study as well.
If you want to go way back in history, the ones that they couldn't match the salary for was the radiologists when we had the hospital. And so
what?
The
radiologists.
radiologists. And so they had to let the radiologists form their own group and contract for radiology. The way they solved that problem years ago. That was probably in the 1980s.
A little more recent than the plague, huh?
And don't forget the Red Death.
Okay. All right. So moving on. Thank you, Frank and Lisa, for the information.
Thank you.
And now we will move on to discuss the salaries for our other electeds, the sheriff and the county clerk. And again, I just want to caution everybody that we're going to talk about positions and salaries, and we are not mentioning names. And I also want to invite Annie and Shauna to chime in because we don't have a resolution on the agenda, but I'd really kind of like to get some sort of consensus so we can move forward with the resolution that may not be to every committee member's liking, but will present the broadest scope of issues to the full legislature, because I think this is a decision all 14 of us need to be making. So what's your pleasure, folks? You want to start with the clerk? Is that one easier? Martha?
Well, I think we had asked for some more information about comparable salaries and that sort of thing. I don't know if Ruby has anything to present to get us started.
I did not ask Ruby for any additional information. We got a list of the salaries of every clerk in the state from Maureen, and I have to say I don't see what more information would be helpful to us. This is not, and you rightly pointed out, Martha, that the distribution of salaries doesn't really make a lot of sense. When you try to compare apples to apples, everybody's just kind of setting their salary where they feel like they ought to set their salary. So I didn't see that there was much to be gained by putting more on Ruby's plate to find more information than we already have.
I'm sorry. I thought I remembered an email where she said she would, look for something. So I just want to ask if she has anything additional to add. If not, then we move on. So.
No, nothing additional.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's start with the clerk, because there's only one issue with that, and that's what the salary is going to be in the next term. As Martha rightly pointed out, there's no rhyme or reason to how these salaries are set. I mean, our contiguous counties, their population levels are all over the place, and so are the salary levels, and there doesn't seem to be a heck of a lot of correlation between the two. One possible solution that I suggested and would support is that Maureen's salary is based on a 35-hour work week, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, given that she has a staff of, 18 or 19 people, all of whom work 37 and a half or 40 hours a week. And I think she needs to be there as long as they are. So if we assume that she's going to increase her hours, or is actually working 40 hours rather than 35, that's about a 14% increase in her salary, which would bring her up to around 93.7. But that's just one possible solution, and I'd be happy to hear what everyone thinks. Mike.
In the past, when we talked about the sheriffs and the clerk salaries, HR, they call it HR back then, but they always rated these positions, just like they would rate other positions in the county based on what they can supervisory or their hours and all of those things. And we would get a recommendation of what the salary range ought to be based on the other employees in the county and what they're receiving based on similar kinds of responsibilities. We know that we have other department heads, for example, that have equal or greater responsibilities, or maybe the sheriff and the clerk have more responsibilities. I don't know, but I don't think Jim, I don't exactly agree with you that it's kind of willy-nilly how we set these salaries, at least we have in the past. And I'd like to kind of get an idea of where they fit in with similar employees in the county, and before we decide pull a figure out of the air.
Well, I'm not suggesting we pull a figure out of the air. I'm suggesting that at some way we decided that Maureen should be making X dollars per hour, and she's working more hours than we gave her credit for working. And I think anybody in that position would have to work more hours because that's how many hours her employees work. I mean, I guess that what you're suggesting is that we have some sort of a job description and we assign point factor ratings to the position to determine what she should be paid. Is that where you're going, Mike?
I think that's pretty much what we did in the past. I remember when Anita Fitzpatrick was the commissioner, that's the way she would bring us information about those two positions when we talked about it.
Ruby, do you have any input for that?
Right, I'm looking into our historical records for sheriff and county clerk. There basically is no job description. It's the title and that's it. There's no point factor rating. It's unclassified. The only thing on there is our county tagline, Tompkins County is committed to equity and inclusion. We encourage those with similar values to apply. So if we wanted to do that, we would have to create a job description and then do a point factor rating.
Could I interject really quick?
Yeah, okay. People have hands up. We've got Ann, Martha, Rich, and Glenn.
I'm still formulating my thoughts, but I just wanted to say really quick that we are using names. We said we weren't going to, so maybe we can go back to saying the clerk, the clerk supervises the current, or if you're going to talk to about a current clerk, a former clerk.
Well, I was actually more concerned about when we start talking about comparative compensation levels for our employees, because their privacy is what we generally protect, not our electeds. But that's a good point, Annie. We can talk about the county clerk.
Right, just because we're saying,
Right.
It's not for her, it's for the position. Thank you.
Okay, Martha?
Annie, was that all you had to say? It was your turn.
Yep,
Okay.
So put your hand down.
I'm trying to figure that out.
Okay. Mike, I don't remember Anita Fitzpatrick doing that, but I remember her doing it for our other staff positions. So, and I think that is the distinction here between these two elected positions, as well as our district attorney that's elected. We don't have a job description and there are no qualifications. And I do remember seeing an email from Ruby about the qualifications we have, like experience and education that we have on file for our other department heads. So, yeah, so this is the dilemma about trying to compare these positions and sort of make them equitable with department heads who have criteria they have to meet and who have to answer and be evaluated by the county administrator, et cetera. So it's a real apples to oranges or something comparison. Now, I certainly would support a 40-hour designation for the clerk's position. I think that seems fair. I'm not sure why it ever was a 35, although certainly a lot of, there are definitely staff who prefer to have a 35-hour week or 37 and a half. It's a matter of their flexibility, but I don't know where the 35 came from.
I asked Maureen and she said she didn't know either. It's just always been that way since she's worked there.
All right. So, I have no problem with sort of bumping that salary up as a 40-hour position. But anything, sort of more, if you're actually comparing the position to other department heads, I can't get past the fact that they're not comparable. So that's something I can't really support.
Well, I know Rich and Glenn are waiting. I will just say that it's really difficult to, if you're looking for comparable, you don't think that department heads are comparable and the the county clerks around the state are just all over the field. I don't know what you're going to use to make your determination that.
No, I think that's not fair. I think they are right now all over the lot because we have incomplete data. For example, if we knew, and I'm not sure it's worth doing this, but if we knew, if we tracked population of the county, how many employees the person supervises, do they have a DMV? That kind of thing, that, we could stack them more rationally and maybe see whether there are patterns. I don't think we have the full picture at this point. I'm also not sure it's worth doing that kind of labor. So that's why I'm saying there's a way to make a more rational comparison. I don't think we have the data right now to do that.
Okay, Rich?
Yeah, I agree with everybody. This is
Guys, you're easy.
well, but I mean, it's a hard decision because we don't have criteria. And talking about the position, you can't look to the specific capabilities of the person who's sitting there now.
So you have to look to the job requirements.
Which we don't have any. Other than, Deborah, I think your point, it's sort of a dog's breakfast, but we make the best of it that we can, is that we annualize it to 40 hours a week and up the salary on that basis and call it a day.
Okay, I've got Glenn and then Mike again.
Thank you. I doubt very much if we'll ever get a job description for the sheriff or the county clerk, because there is none. I mean, if there is, it's in the state books, and it's very, very minor that anybody can be elected if they want to. The one thing about the sheriff, the undersheriff is paid more money than he is. And the sheriff is not due overtime or anything like that, which means that the undersheriff could make an awful lot more money. And also, I'd caution everybody about job descriptions. If you're going to do a job description for all these places, you're going to have to come up with a job description for the county legislature too, which will be something because everybody else views that as a different job. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, Mike?
So I don't know whether the clerk's deputy is paid more than the clerk, as Glenn mentioned, with the undersheriff being paid more than the sheriff right now. Should the sheriff and or the clerk, if that's the case, be up a grade, a labor grade? Would that be a way of looking at that if we
Well, I don't know if Maureen's.
And how they should be compensated. But I'm not convinced that you can't, without a job description, rate these positions. Supervisory responsibilities by themselves are huge in both of these departments.
Yes, they are.
And records, time records, reports that have to be generated, all of those kinds of things are things that can be quantified without having a full job description.
Indeed. Maureen, I guess, would know if her deputy clerks are getting paid more than she is. Maureen?
So the deputy position is 6,000 less than mine. However, when I was elected, I lost longevity and I pay more for health insurance than the management does. So it comes out about even.
Okay, thanks. All right, Martha?
Let's try, Glenn, you brought in the sheriff. I'm hoping.
I want to leave that for later.
Yeah, let me do one at a time. Maureen, you pay more for health insurance. I thought management and confidential which you would be, this position is under, aren't you? Don't you
I'm
get the same as white collar?
I'm elected, so it's 80/20 with no VIBA reimbursement.
Okay, what's the white collar?
85/15.
They are?
Well, it's 80/20 with the 5%, isn't it, the VIBA reimbursement?
I see, at least,
It's 80/20.
80/20, but they get VIBA, which I don't get the VIBA.
Let's not get too lost in the weeds here.
okay,
Yeah.
all right,
I just know that because I used to be management, so.
all right. VIPA is a different animal. I want everybody to understand also that that both these positions follow the white collar in terms of annual increases, whatever the increases are. So we will set the salaries at the beginning of the terms, but then for the following 4 years, they go along with union negotiations. Okay, I guess I've said what I want to say about the clerk's position. I'm supportive of a 40-hour salary, but that's where I'd go. Thanks.
Thanks, Martha. I mean, this is it's like quicksand. There doesn't seem to be anything solid to stand on. So I just think acknowledging the number of hours that go into doing the job is the best way to deal with this. Annie, you've got your hand up again.
Thank you. Yeah, just another question. So wondering for the deputy that Maureen said was paid, I think 6,000 less. So just looking at the salary right now, if the clerk was moved up to 40 hours, just wondering how much more that would be above the deputy clerk. Do we know that?
Well, that's an increase. That would be about 6,000 plus 11,000, 17,000.
So it would be 17,000 then above the deputy clerk?
Yes.
Okay. So that sounds to me a little more substantial. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Annie. Shauna?
Thanks, Deb. I was wondering, and this is probably a question for Ruby, is there any way that we can include these two positions in the compensation study?
Sure. There's no reason why not.
Okay.
But we don't have time to wait for that in
No,
order
that's right.
deadline for the next term's salary. So that's
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, my feeling is, I see your hand, Mike. My feeling is we should, given the issues that have been raised in the context of these conversations, the last two meetings, there's obviously something to be said for including everything, except I guess the DA, because we don't have any choice about the DA's salary. So Mike and then Martha.
I don't know where 35 hours or 40 hours comes from. I don't think that a clerk is required to spend 35 hours in the office or 40 hours in the office. And I think the time they spend outside as elected officials also is part of their job.
Yep.
They get accosted on the street by someone who wants to talk about their business. That's what we do as legislators, and that's what they do as elected officials. So it's kind of mushy to say, well, let's just raise it from 35 to 40, because I'm not sure where 35 came from, and apparently the current clerk isn't aware of that either.
But the fact remains that the current salary is set on the basis of 35 hours. And the actuality of the job is more like 40, if not more. If you can find something less squishy to base a decision on. I'd love to hear it, but I'm just hearing,
I'd like
you know.
to understand how it is set at 35 hours.
Maureen, when you and I spoke about this, you said you didn't know that was just a situation you inherited. If you have additional light to shed, I guess we'd like to hear it.
I have no additional light. I know that's what it is reported to the state and that it's a 35-hour position. I have no idea why.
Oh, for pension. Okay, that would make sense.
Okay. Annie, is your hand still up or do you have another question?
Yeah, one more question. The deputy clerk, is their salary based on 40 hours or 35 something?
40.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Martha?
Yeah, just in the compensation study, if the elected positions are added in, I just assume they would be compared to other elected officials and not, you wouldn't compare an elected sheriff to an appointed chief of police, for example. I just assumed that would be part of it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I don't know if we have anything like a real consensus, but my intention is to move forward on the basis of acknowledging that the clerk's job is a 40-hour-a-week job, and that entails a 14% increase. And I guess we will have this discussion again, only bigger, when we bring that resolution to the floor. So now moving on to the sheriff. There are two issues with the sheriff, which makes it more complicated. There's the issue of the salary in and of itself, which we would address in the ordinary course every 4 years. But there's the additional problem that the undersheriff now makes $10,000 a year more than the sheriff does. Many of the lieutenants are now earning more because of the overtime. And the overtime is not, as I understand it, an issue that's created by the sheriff's office or under the control of the sheriff's office, because of the fact of the matter is that the sheriff's office is understaffed when you take into account, or especially when you take into account the people who are on disability in 207C, I guess it is. And so there's no choice but to assign overtime. And now I think the problem is going to be compounded by the new contract, if it goes into effect, which will substantially increase the lieutenant's base pay before overtime as of January 1st of next year, so that it will be more than the sheriff's. So that's where we are. Thoughts, and I see Martha's hands up.
Thank you. I wasn't sure whether the undersheriff can get overtime. I thought that position doesn't qualify for overtime.
Well, even if it, I mean, even conceding that it doesn't, and I'm not sure it matters, because her base salary is $10,000 more than the sheriff's.
Ruby, do you happen to know?
Comp time,
I'm sorry?
compensation, comp time, not overtime.
Okay.
Okay. Lisa, was that, okay. So the base pay for the undersheriff is $10,000 more than the sheriff's base pay, right? Or the sheriff's pay.
Right.
And what's the lieutenant? The lieutenant is the next line down.
Yep.
And what's the-
Well, I don't know. I don't know what their base pay is right now. I just know that it's high enough so that the overtime puts them over what the sheriff is earning. But I can say that under the new contract, their base pay will be higher than the sheriff's, assuming that the bargaining unit accepts it.
All right, so maybe before we actually vote on a resolution on this one, we can find out what when will we learn whether they've approved the contract?
Lisa, you would know. They're voting tomorrow morning, I think.
Yeah, anytime after tomorrow.
Okay, so if we can get an update on that, on what the salary scale will be, and the undersheriff's salary is also part of that or not?
It's separate from that.
Because that's considered management and confidential?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
They're not part of the union.
Got it. Okay. So I would like to look at that. The issue of overtime, I just frankly think we really can't address. We've had discussions over the decades I've been here where the sheriff, different sheriffs, different times would come in and say, if, our overtime budget is so high and, if I could have 4 new positions, I could maybe bring it down a little bit. So you'd think, wow, 4 new positions, can't you bring it down a lot? Really, no. I mean, you kind of have structurally, you have to double your staffing to meaningfully bring down overtime, because there are always vacations, there's always 207C, et cetera, et cetera. And it's almost a catch-22. If you increase your basic staffing, then you also increase the positions that you feel you have to cover if that person is away. So I honestly don't, I can't really deal with the question of overtime. I absolutely deal with, think the question of the base salary should be a different structure, and the undersheriff and the lieutenants shouldn't make on a base salary more than the sheriff. So that's where I would go, but I really don't feel like it's up to us to cover the differential with overtime.
Well, that's fine. We don't cover it, but what are we going to do about the undersheriff? I mean, the undersheriff shouldn't be making $10,000 more than the sheriff, and the sheriff should be making more than the undersheriff.
That's what I said. I'm interested in thinking about how to put the sheriff higher than the undersheriff.
Well, you could put them 1 job grade higher.
Yeah, that's whatever the mechanism is. That's what I'm saying. But I really wouldn't try to deal with the overtime differential.
Okay, well, that's fine. But just dealing with the base pay differential, the undersheriff is now in job grade 90. The sheriff, is she in 90 or 91, Ruby?
Hold on, let me verify.
But remember, we're not classifying the sheriff anyway.
No, I know that. I'm just trying to figure out what figure we would use to make sure that we don't have this situation again.
The undersheriff is 90.
Okay, and so job grade
91 will go from 111,571.20 to 122. Well, that's for the undersheriff.
Right. And job grade 91 is about 122, right?
122,740.80.
And currently the people that are getting paid at that job grade level are the Director of Finance, the Commissioner of Social Services, the Mental Health Commissioner, the Medical Director for Mental Health, which is a position that's currently not filled, and the Commissioner of Planning and Sustainability. I tried to look at,
Right.
Yeah. And I tried to look at how many FTEs those people supervised, just to see if there was some relationship to their salary. And the Director of Finance, based on the recommended positions in the 2022 budget, Director of Finance has 13 FTEs. The Commissioner of Social Services has 181. The Mental Health Commissioner has 57. The Commissioner of Planning and Sustainability has 11. And the Sheriff's Office has 52, plus the jail staff is another 49. So there just, again, isn't a lot of help in the FTE numbers. You know, I hear you, Martha, expressing concern consistently that we don't get to vet these elected officials in terms of their qualifications. And I understand that concern, but the fact of the matter is that these people are hired to do a job. And it seems to me that the nature and characteristics and requirements of the job that they're actually required to do is at least as important, if not more important, than what their qualifications are on paper. You know, I have a friend who was married to a guy who had 3 PhDs, and she was fond of saying he was missing the bottom half of his IQ. I mean, I honestly wouldn't put him in charge of the SPCA. You know, the guy couldn't manage his way out of a paper bag. So, you know, the qualifications are important, yes, but the ability and the demands of the job are also important. And I think that's the balance we have to try to strike.
I have some other comments, but Mike had his hand up a while ago.
Mike?
I think you discussed what I was thinking about, so I'll pass.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have anything to say, or is this just going to be me and Martha squaring off? Shauna.
Yeah, I definitely think that it makes sense that the sheriff is paid more than the undersheriff in a profession that respects chain of command. There's no reason why they should make less than the undersheriff. So it does in fact make sense for us to increase the salary to the next pay grade. And I would do that as of January 1st if we have the ability.
We can do that. I checked with Jonathan, and we can raise salary in the middle of an elected's term subject to permissive referendum, which I think we've already discussed in our executive session. Martha, I'm going to let Annie talk and then we'll get back to you, okay? Annie.
But just one question at the moment is just to double check, is Derek's salary based on a 40-hour work week?
Oh, I have no idea what it's based on, but my guess is his job is to be on call 24/7, 365, and he does not get overtime or comp time.
Right, but I would just double check that so we don't run into something later if we up the salary, for instance, and then it's based on 35, and then it gets, we look at it and say that needs to be changed to 40, so then it has to automatically go up. So just want to double check on that.
Good point, Annie. I'll check with him. Okay, Martha.
Could you remind me how much the sheriff makes now?
What? It's right around 101.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would agree with the idea of going up a labor grade. I mean, I think it's helpful if we have structural reasons for the things we do. And just to say that we think, you know, it's a really tough job or something, that's not a structural reason. I think the idea of chain of command, the undersheriff has the word under in the title, so it should be
not over.
It should be a labor grade lower than sheriff. So I am certainly comfortable with going to labor grade 91. Yeah, it seems fair to do it now. Although I guess I'm trying to think of why would you do that now and not do the clerk now? If we do one,
for one reason, because the clerk is not making less than anybody that she's supervising.
That's good.
If you're gonna hang your hat on chain of command, then that's a key difference.
Got it. That'll do.
All right. Mike.
I support raising it a labor grade for the next elected sheriff. I would oppose raising it for the next year.
Okay, well, and that's a debate. You know, I know that that's going to be a major debate. So I think that that's a debate that we ought to have among all 14 of us, because I suspect there's 14 different opinions. And I acknowledge that that has been your position consistently, Mike, and I respect that. Glenn.
Can we make a resolution right now to increase the sheriff effective immediately or January 1st, and then bring it to the full ledge for approval?
Well, I can write that up. Yeah. Martha, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just trying to look at the calendar, and I think that I'm not sure where the next BCP is, but it seems like, yes, something that we probably ought to move ahead. And I don't know, Kathy, do you think public safety should be looking at this too, or what do we need to do?
No, I don't think so. I think you just go through budget, but the next budget meeting is December 13th, and then we have a legislature meeting on December 21st.
Do we need a public hearing on this or anything, or?
Well, are you talking about increasing it effective January 1st?
Yeah.
And you said it would require a permissive referendum?
It's subject to a permissive referendum, yes. But
So,
require us to do anything. The permissive referendum means that the public, if 10%, what is it, 10%? If they get 10% of the voting public to sign a petition saying they object, then we have to have a referendum. But
How much time do they have to be able to get those signatures? Don't we have to give them a month or something before we come?
yeah, we should do this as soon as possible. So I can write, Mike, you have something?
Yeah, I've just got to say, you kind of just said, well, we know your position, but we're going to go ahead and do this anyway.
No, I'm saying we're going to.
That's what I'm hearing right now, because Glenn wants to move ahead with raising the salary. What a terrible precedent this is. We have never, ever raised salaries midterm for elected officials. And this is a terrible precedent. And if we think that 10% of the population is going to get out there and do a permissive referendum, it's probably not likely that not with the population that we are a voter numbers that we have in this county. But I'm just thinking that the road you're going down here is a very, very wrong path for us.
Well, look, obviously reasonable minds can differ on this. I did not say I don't care what you think. What I said was, I hear your consistent position, but I don't think that this is a decision that's going to be made among the five of us. I just want to present the broadest spectrum of issues.
You have an elected official coming and saying, I'd like to have a raise now because I have recommended a raise for my undersheriff. And I just think that's a terrible road to go down.
Well, but the process under which a raise is recommended is that what the revised job description, based on what an employee is actually doing, goes to HR, and HR assigns the job point ratings, and they decide whether what the person is actually doing should be graded at 89 or 90. I mean,
yeah, I understand how reclass works.
Well, but you know, the subtext that I'm hearing about this increase in the undersheriff's salary is that somehow or another, Derek planned this out so she'd get a raise and then he could ask for a raise. And I think that that's not likely to be what happened. I guess I'm not that distrustful of our sheriff.
Neither am I, but it sure looks like we're trying to take care of somebody here. Doesn't look good.
Okay, Rich, you've been quiet.
My position is I think we do want the sheriff making more than the undersheriff. So something is in order here. But I share Mike's concern that I am uncomfortable changing the salary for a sitting elected official, that there should be an election triggering that bump. So I'd be in favor of waiting until the election occurs. So we're not sending any kind of message that could look inappropriate. I mean, I understand what everybody's saying and what we're trying to do, and I think it's above board, but I can understand the criticism as well. And for that reason, I would favor doing this at the end of term. Thanks.
Okay. Martha.
It's my understanding that the sheriff brought this to the chair of the legislature some months ago. So, in a sense, he's been waiting already for a number of months. If this feels too rushed to make a motion, just a motion without a resolution now, we certainly could take it up later and do it as effective February 1st, for example. I mean, I think to try to pass something that, theoretically the citizens could pay attention to and collect signatures. You're doing it between Christmas and New Year's. That really looks like a setup that you're trying to avoid public scrutiny. So maybe although I support the idea of doing this, maybe we do it in more regular order and put it off till February 1st so that there's time if the public does have some reaction to it.
Well, we could make it effective March 1st. I don't care. I mean, I would just like to get it on record and get it moving, because it's ridiculous that the undersheriff is making $10,000 a year more than the sheriff, and that the lieutenants are now going to have base pay higher than the sheriffs. That's absurd. I don't care if it is in the middle of the election term. I mean, a lot of stuff has happened in the last 2 years that's been quite out of the ordinary. And we just have to roll with it. Mike.
I think I made this point before, but it's not new for other members of the department to make more money than the sheriff when you start adding the overtime in that a lot of them get. The highest paid employees have often been in the county, deputy sheriffs with a lot of overtime.
Okay, but we're taking the overtime out of the equation now. Now what we're talking about is base pay. Okay, I mean, I think, and Mark made the point that the overtime is kind of a wild card, and we shouldn't take that into consideration. And that's fair. That makes sense. But base pay is something else. And the differential is substantial. I mean, $10,000 a year is a lot. Kathy?
So you said you had a communication with Jonathan about this action?
Yeah.
So it doesn't require a local law?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Wasn't my impression that it did. We can pass the resolution. I can go back and check. And certainly I will do that before I draft anything and present it. And Mike, I really want to make it clear. It's not that I'm saying, it's too bad that you think what you think. I'm just saying this difference of opinion needs to be decided by 14 legislators and not 5 people on this committee. Anybody else? Okay. Well, is it I mean, is it the consensus that we ought to be putting together a couple of resolutions for the clerk's salary and the sheriff's salary? If we wait until the next BCP meeting and it doesn't go on the legislative calendar until the second meeting in December, I guess that would be soon enough to meet the requirements of setting salaries for the next term. And then if we put enough space between the date that we pass the resolution in the legislature one way or another, and when any immediate salary increase for the sheriff might go into effect, assuming that it's supported, then let's say March 1st, that would give people time to avail themselves of the permissive referendum procedure. And if it doesn't pass as an immediate raise, it's a moot point. Does that pretty much summarize where we are? Thoughts, Martha?
Yeah, sorry, I lost power for a minute. I had to go run and get my cord. So if I missed something, sorry. We do need to set the salary for the next term. So there are two issues, right? Maybe you already said this. Okay, so we can make a motion to set or include in the resolution setting the next term salary, so that in time for petitioning for the office. That's the other calendar issue.
Right. But if we do that at the second meeting in December, if the legislature votes on that, that's enough time. The only question here is if it's the sense of the majority of the entire legislature that the sheriff's increase should go into effect before January of 2023. We want to leave enough time for that permissive referendum procedure to be meaningful.
Sounds good.
Okay, Annie?
Thank you. I do like the idea of, say, waiting for it to go into effect in March. I could also, I'm not sure how I feel of either of these raises also waiting to go into effect next January. At this point, I don't have a strong feeling either way. I see pros and cons of both versus, for the position and then for the perception in the public. Just if we're saying too that the sheriff is getting paid less than the undersheriff too, just looking at now the clerk is paid the same as the deputy clerk, so I know
the deputy
are the same.
No, the deputy clerk makes gross is about 6,000 less, but the differential in the net pay is somewhat less because of the difference in health insurance.
Right. So, so if we're looking at the net, so I'm just, so I think I guess I'm not clear on where I want to go. I'm just saying that I could see pros and cons for each of these positions now, and then there could be issues with doing one and not the other. So,
well, Maureen's not requesting an increase in her salary, or the clerk is not requesting an increase in her salary during the current term. She is requesting it for the next term.
Right, but we're setting a possible precedent of an elected official requesting a salary upgrade. I know there's reasons, but I'm just trying to play out all the different scenarios. So, okay, I'm not sure where I would go right now, but I appreciate you being maybe setting the date at least till March, and then the full legislature can talk about it.
Okay. All right, is there anything else anybody wants to discuss here? Or are we meeting out for this month?
So we're gonna bring a resolution to the
Next,
following.
the next month's BCP meeting. I'll write something up and we'll,
Thank you.
anything else? All right then, thank you all. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And again, congratulations, Mike. You're
Thank you.
still our colleague.
Congratulations, Mike.
All righty, see y'all.
Happy holidays. Thank you.